Hello, everybody. It's Michael Gurian here, coming to you from the West Coast. I'm sorry I can't be with you actually there in the meeting. I'm on the road that day teaching in another location, and that day is 2 days away. So I appreciate getting these. I'm gonna move fast through these questions because I know you need this in a couple days, and I have to fly out. So we will get this to you via YouTube, and you will have it. I'm honored to be asked, and of course I want to thank Vermel, whom I've known for many years. She's wonderful. Thanks for asking for this, and a lot of questions you might have about the Gurian work, Vermel is gonna be able to answer. Other questions are quickly accessed or answered on GurianInstitute.com. Just explore that for a while. The success button, the programs button, the kind of programs and interventions I think you're starting to look at to deal with the discipline issues there in your school district are interventions we can provide. So I'm glad you asked. So I'll go through the questions. Do you see this study as a cure-all to improve learning for all boys and girls? I think this person is referring to the 2-year pilot in Missouri that we did out of the University of Missouri, Kansas City. We did a 2-year pilot there out of the School of Ed and in 6 school districts, and that's reported in Boys and Girls Learn Differently. So if folks haven't read that yet, that is a really good one to read. It gives a deep view of how nature, nurture, and culture all work together and come together with race, come together with socioeconomic, and how these interventions, these brain-based interventions, how they affect all those levels and improve all those levels. So Boys and Girls Learn Differently is a great place to go for that. You'll also see success, and you'll see specific like boys of color, children of color, working with children of color on GurianInstitute.com. So some data is definitely there. I don't think anything's a cure-all though. So I would never say that. That wouldn't be in my language, but you'll see the success data. Discipline referrals go down. Bullying and incidents of bullying in a school go down, grades go up, test scores go up, and that's for both boys and girls across the gender spectrum. The brain can be trained based on what you want it to produce, this question says. With your study, did you look at the possibility you were seeing what the brain was trained or taught to do? And then the next question on this list, number 3, is about have we performed studies on infants? Because perhaps those infants have not been exposed yet to thoughts and opinions of others, so maybe the brain differences wouldn't exist, and therefore the interventions wouldn't be necessary. Well, in fact, if you go over the last month, this is April, so during this month I published a lot on the new studies that Mri Fetal Brains, and so what we discovered 40 years ago are now being rediscovered by international cross-cultural research using scans on fetal brains, and you can already see male-female brain difference on fetal brains. And the reason is that it comes in on the X and the Y chromosomes. So that's why it crosses races and crosses cultures. That's why we find, for instance, in all industrialized countries, boys are 1.5 years behind girls, in their schoolwork and in nearly all of their test scores, et cetera. And then you add on, of course, race, you add on socioeconomic, and it can become even more amplified. And it's rooted in male-female brain difference, and especially in systemic failure in systems like school systems, which are filled with wonderful people. But you folks there sitting listening to this, when I came through grad school, Vermel, the teachers who get MEDs or who get teacher certifications, they're not seeing these brain scans. They're not understanding or seeing that male and female learn differently. They know it. They intuit it. Every parent intuits it, but for some ideological reasons, universities don't teach it, and so teachers don't learn it, and so systems are set up, and they can fail girls in some ways, but in general, they hemorrhage boys, and then and again, especially boys of color. So those two, I hope I've answered. The answer to that is it's nature, nurture, and culture. They all matter. What I think you're asking me to do here with you, though, is I'm emphasizing the nature part because that's something that we have 23 years of programming and intervention that works. And that part, yes, is well established, even though in the popular press, you'll certainly see there are people out there saying, no, it's all socialized, but they're not showing brain scans. Brain scans really do show the science. Fourth question, is it that girls need more encouragement, or is it that for years, girls in most cultures have been seen as subservient and always had to work harder to be validated? I'm not sure what the it is. I'm not sure exactly how to answer this question, but yeah, well, all children need encouragement. The male brain, boys need encouragement in certain ways, girls need encouragement in certain ways. Males tend to be more suspicious of praise without outcome, praise not for good action, than girls. Girls tend to like more verbal praise across the board. Boys tend to be a little more suspicious of it. They tend to want praise that fits what they've done. But everyone needs encouragement, and there are many ways in which girls need encouragement, especially for tasking that they don't have as much experience with, higher math tasking, certain science tasking. Statistically, we find more issues for girls in those areas, and it's nature, nurture, and culture. So they all operate. We do a lot with girls in STEM, and especially technology engineering, which is really the area right now where girls are behind. They've caught up or surpassed in the biological sciences. But in technology and engineering, there's still a very big gap, and it's more than encouragement. They need from birth onward, they need more help than we give them, and more training than we give teachers on spatial development, the parts of the brain, especially here, that work in spatial science. Without that extra development for females, you're going to see aggregate female scores in higher math and in science lower, and you're going to see less females in those professions. It's just going to happen. So we have nature, nurture, and culture all together. Could this study and other similar studies, which conclude that male and female brains are wired differently, produce inequities in the workforce because society would like to believe that women are less qualified for something? What happens when females are indeed gifted in non-traditional fields, but there are inequities when it comes to salaries? They're paid less. Obviously, there's very big questions, many of which don't specifically have to do with a school district intervention to alter discipline, but I understand why you're asking it, so I'll give a quick response. We're not going to see huge gains for females in technology engineering unless we do something about all three, nature, nurture, and culture, to help them. So we have to do something about all three. How do we know this? We know this because billions and billions of dollars are being spent to try to get more females to have longevity in those professions. And what we're able to do is get more girls and young women to go to college in those fields, and then they go into those fields in larger numbers, but within 5 years, a lot of them start drifting out. And so it's nature, nurture, and culture, and it's too big. If you have me consult for you, I will do a lot with you on this, but it would be too big to say, well, if you talk about male-female brain difference, that's going to cause women to have inequity. It won't. I've done corporate training in a lot of the Fortune 500s and Fortune 100s, and those teams were really glad to get training in male-female brain difference, and most of them were high-tech, and they were very glad to get this because it helped the males to understand how to relate to the females. It helped the females understand how to relate to the males, why males did certain things, why they didn't communicate certain things and thought they were communicating it, and vice versa. So the answer is no, it does not create inequities. Those inequities can exist, and this kind of training actually helps to remove those inequities. Why did God create us in His image and likeness, but yet there is a vast difference in learning and achievement between boys and girls? Okay, now this is theological and faith-based. I'm Jewish, so I guess I'll respond with a combination of science and faith. My understanding of God would be that that gender is wired in and sex is wired in to God, or certainly to God's experiment and God's creation. I'm coming from a science perspective, not a Bible perspective, but even the Bible obviously starts out with that there is female and male. Since it's on the genome, since it's inescapable and on the genome, it means everything is female and male. So I wouldn't go too far into a faith perspective because that's not what I do. I do science and interventions, but I think faith and science fit together here. And I did write a book with an evangelical Christian psychologist, Gregory Jans, in which we took all of the brain science, which is my expertise. We connected it with Bible, which is his expertise. The book was called Raising Boys by Design. And then the synthesis was our interventions and how the strategies and theory and strategies and pedagogy work to improve the lives of kids and to help teachers. And so that is a book that has a faith base and will further answer that question. 7, how will changing the classroom to accommodate one gender, males, impact the civil rights of another gender? Yeah, it does not. I know there has been a lot of sort of ideological stuff on this where people will argue, well, if you well, initially when 50 years ago when we were improving things for girls, then there would people who would argue, well, don't do that. Can't just focus on girls. You know, we got to focus on everyone. I would be one who, I started this work 40 years ago, but when I started it, I was one who said, no, if we improve things for girls, a lot's going to improve for boys. Some will not, which is what I'm going to talk about in a minute, but a lot will. Similarly now, now we see that for the last just under 40 years, it's actually boys who have been behind girls in American education, and certainly in discipline, which is your task force, obviously way behind girls. Behavior, males are more likely to be diagnosed with behavioral disorders, to have behavior problems. They're more likely to have discipline problems, etc. So helping boys is only going to help girls. And I'll give you some examples that are evidence-based from our studies. One is that because teachers spend less time on classroom management after these interventions, they spend less time in classroom management. And because they spend less time in classroom management, the learning of girls improves. Most of the classroom management time they've been spending is 10 to 15 minutes managing boys. Now they're spending a few minutes, a couple minutes, managing boys. That's 10, 12 minutes available now for everyone to learn, to not be spent in classroom management. And so that only helps the girls. It helps everyone. And in fact, you'll see on GurianInstitute.com, you're going to see that test scores go up for both boys and girls. Grades go up for both boys and girls, and discipline referrals go down for both boys and girls. And obviously that's going to include the gender spectrum. When this pedagogy and these interventions and strategies are taught and used. So no, it does not create it. It can certainly be framed that way by people who don't want it, and there are people out there who will do that. But I always challenge those folks. I've debated them. I don't tend to debate them anymore. I don't find it worthwhile. But I have debated them, and my challenge to them, which they're always unable to answer, is, okay, so how show us the data on how you have improved through not dealing with males and females, how you have improved this data. And, of course, it's very hard for them to do that because they're not really intervening. They're not really providing anything that intervenes. They're just sort of attacking and saying it's going to be a civil liberties violation. Are you recommending that as we move forward, we should consider more single-gender schools? The Gurian Institute's work is mainly in co-ed schools because most schools are co-ed. So, and I'm not a person who would say co-ed is better than or worse than single-gender. Single-gender is better or worse than co-ed. So I think the data is just more nuanced than that. However, single-gender is an intervention if it's done with fidelity and if all the teachers are trained, go through extensive training in how to teach boys, how to teach girls across the board, from curricula to behavioral. You can get some immediate help with single gender academies because they can take on some of the baseline issues of discipline, of classroom management, and of achievement. They can take them on in a really focused way, a male-centric and a female-centric, a girls' academies, female-centric way. And so you can get some very good help. So if you do decide to do more single-gender academies, we'd be glad to help train everyone there and help you with getting those going because, as you'll see from our website, we've had a lot of success with those. But you'll also see from the website co-ed. What our research shows is that those are both can be good structures. If everyone is trained, they both have advantages, they both have disadvantages. Obviously, people have to opt in, and that certain issues get removed when there are single gender hormonal issues, certain social issues, especially in the middle school years. And if I do more with you, I can give you much more on that. You talked a lot about the brain and what each gender prefers and how, but should they still be held to certain behaviors? I'm going to answer that with, of course, a yes and a no. Of course, everyone should be held to good behavior. I mean, no doubt about it. Excuses don't need to be made. We don't need to make excuses for girls who do incredibly nasty things that are, you know, verbal bullying and emotional abuse. They can't do that. We have to help them not to do that, and we have to hold them to a high standard of behavior. Similarly, boys who will do some of that, but boys are more likely to do things that are more physical in terms of their bullying or dominance. They can't do that. It's wrong behavior. They can't do it. So we're going to hold everyone to high standards of behavior. And in fact, a lot of the academies, that have over the last 20 years have been emerging, some of which are single gender, they hold kids to very high standards. So the high standards are great. But let me give an example of something that that might get subsumed into high standards for behavior, but in fact would go against what I would say are right standards, and standards that are going to help you all to improve your task force for discipline, to help you help your schools to improve these areas of discipline. If we discipline a child, or the child is referred to the principal by the teacher for tapping his feet, for bumping another kid, for doing what I call aggression nurturance, knocking a kid into a locker in the hall when they're being playful, what you in your document, call horseplay. That's an area where boys are especially vulnerable, because the male brain is cerebellum dependent. That's this part of the brain back here. That's the doing center of the brain, and we have a lot more blood flow in the doing center of the brain than females do, and we tend to learn more kinesthetically as males than females do. And females are doing words on both sides of the brain. Males are only doing words, 95 to 100%. They're doing words on the left, not on both sides. So we don't process as much through words as females tend to. We don't use as many words per day when we look at reading, writing, and speaking together, word production, verbalization. So, we're doing more physically and kinesthetically, and we're bonding more physically and kinesthetically. We're building social bonds more physically and kinesthetically. And a lot of what we're seeing in school districts with discipline issues, as I believe, I only had time, I just received it yesterday, so I only had time to do a quick read on your document. But I've seen many documents like it before. It looks really, really solid. If you want me to do more work with you, the next step would be for me to consult, and I would go deep into that document and all of what you have to help you, at a deeper level. But in a cursory look at it, you're certainly seeing what everyone else is seeing, which is that a lot of what boys are getting dinged for, and especially boys of color, a lot of it grows from two sources that can be fixed. Some things you can't fix. It can be the boy himself. He's a problem. That's its own category. But two things can be dealt with over a period of 1 to 2, maybe 3 years in your school district. And one is the teacher reporting of discipline issues, which grow to a great extent from her not understanding classroom management and not understanding how these boys are bonding, what they're doing, how they're trying to learn, and not trained in that. Teachers talk for too long, the boys get antsy, the cerebellum gets activated, they move around, they start doing things. Teachers not moving around, ought to be moving around, teachers sitting, it's not going to be as good for the boys to learn. Gradually they become discipline issues. So that's one source of referral. That's in the way the pedagogy and the strategies used to teach, which are failing this group of boys and getting them in trouble. And then the other is that teachers are dinging them for stuff that really isn't a behavioral issue, but that is part of their process. And what we really need is a redirection of their process and understanding and redirection rather than discipline referral. That doesn't solve large bullying, cyberbullying, violence. That's not solved by what I just said. It's another category. But a lot of what I saw in your document is something that is fixable, that we can look at and do something about, so that we don't have these huge gaps, especially gender gaps and racial gaps in discipline. A third area that we can look at to help with that, and it requires parent volunteers, it requires parent involvement, and or if parents are not involved, community involvement is this third element, which is lack of father, which is lack of discipline system in home. All of that coalesces to create a lot of the discipline issues in various socioeconomic classes, and of course, boys of color have a big vulnerability here in terms of lack of father or father being absent, could be incarcerated, not involved. So I'm guessing you already know all the research on that. I've written a number of books on it myself, so we have that available. We can't solve it in terms of getting the father, but what we can do is alter the school system, and it doesn't have much cost because volunteers and mentors are utilized, connecting nursing homes up with the school system, connecting churches, faith communities up, connecting agencies, nonprofits up with the schools to provide males to come into classrooms, elder males, older peer males, and also grown adult and then elders to come into classrooms. And their presence, that male presence, actually helps with discipline and discipline referrals. So that one also can be dealt with through slight alteration in classroom management. Okay, so attached are graphs of Maryland students' testing and suspension data disaggregated by gender. In your experience, what could be the possible causes for achievement gaps and discipline disparities that are evident? So I've explained some of that, but this one also mentions achievement gaps. Let me talk about that and talk more about male-female brain difference in that context, because when I started this 40 years ago, I started it as research. Then just over 30 years ago, maybe 33 years ago now, I started consulting using this research in schools. Then 23 years ago, the Gurian Institute formed, and we have around 100 trainers who can be active and who are working to help schools. And in this process of doing this, what we discovered, of course, we proved it in the pilot, which is very important academically. We proved it in that 2-year pilot in Missouri, but we've seen it since. That 2-year pilot was over 20 years ago. We've seen it since, where these achievement gaps, for instance, STEM gaps for girls, and then the across-the-board gaps for boys. Biggest gaps generally in literacy, but across the board, males are underperforming, and in comparison to females, certainly underperforming, and males themselves are underperforming. A lot of that is based on the fact that the system is a mismatch for the male brain. And then when you layer on socioeconomic and you layer on race, you get, again, an amplified version of the system not being set up for that male brain. And the male brain is learning in certain ways, and what we discovered is in a classroom of 30, and let's say it has 15 boys and 15 girls, there tend to be 3 groups among the boys. Among the girls, most of the girls are performing fine. They may be underperforming at the highest levels, but when we compare them to the boys, they're performing better, most, and then there'll be some exceptions. There'll be 1 or 2 girls who's an exception to that, but of the 15 girls, you'll say at least 10 to 12 performing very solid performance, handing in their homework, getting decent grades, if not really good grades. We could have improvement there, but doing pretty well. But with the 15 boys, we find these 3 groups, and around 5 of the boys we find are failing or falling behind, and it's very clear that they are underperforming and should be doing better, and they're underperforming. Then there's a middle group, which includes some underperformance, but they're working it. They still are inspired. They're still trying to perform, even though the system is mismatched with them. They're still trying to perform. And then we find around 5 boys who, and it can be 5 to 7. We're dealing with millions of kids. You find around 5 who will learn anywhere. You could really place them in any classroom, they'd learn fine. So we bracket them out and we look at these 10, and we also look at these 2 or 3 girls. And now we have, in that classroom of 30, we have the around 10 or 10 to 12 kids who the interventions, the strategies, the new pedagogy, all of that is really going to help. Because those are the kids who the system is mismatched to them. And we create the match in the system because we train the teachers in male-female brain difference and, of course, nurture and culture, and we bring it all together so that they can improve the achievement of these kids. Now, some of it depends on grade. If they're already 9th or 10th grade, some of them have already checked out. The school system, especially these boys, has been so mismatched with them from so early, all the way back in preschool where they started getting suspended and expelled. It's so mismatched for them that they've checked out. But in elementary, they haven't checked out yet. They're still hanging on and hoping that the school system will help them and that the teachers will understand them and that the counselors will understand them and the administration will set up a system for them and that doesn't harm anyone else but really helps them. And they're the ones that drag down all our statistics, and they're the ones that the interventions especially work on. And of course, as we talked about with the data, both male and female test scores go up. Test scores in all the socioeconomic groups go up, in all the races go up. So no one is harmed by the interventions, everyone is helped, but you're especially getting help for these 10 in that classroom of 30 who everyone knows are the ones we're losing. And then once again, looking at the suspension data, what are the systemic changes our task force could recommend to the State Board of Ed to address racial and gender disparities? The primary systemic change that I would suggest, and it is also one that is not very expensive, is to get everyone trained. Get all of the teachers, pick a school district, or if you want to do it as a pilot, pick 6 schools, pick 10 schools, however you want to do it, and or pick a zip code, and train law enforcement, train teachers, counselors, everyone in schools, train faith communities through big public events. Just train everyone in a zip code, or just pick a few schools, train everyone, get as much into the parents, do it through coaches, train coaches, because they sometimes have access to parents who won't be involved with teachers. Through all of these methods, get everyone trained in male-female brain difference, so which is nature, nurture, and culture, and that's the minds of boys and girls training, or the boys and girls learn differently training. Either term can be used, and then track, and you'll see, after a year, then you'll see after 2 years, then after 3 years, you'll see that intervention, not very costly, that intervention has had a profound effect. That is the intervention that I've pioneered and studied. That's the one I know best, and so that's the one that I would suggest you all look at.